She was rejected by her husband, but rekindled with her ex-boyfriend who became a millionaire. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. Emily watched the untouched coffee cup on the kitchen table as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the window. The apartment was immersed in a familiar silence, the kind of quietude that had become her constant companion over the past 3 years. Richard, her husband, had already left for work, as always, without saying goodbye. The routine was well known. He would leave before dawn and return late at night, when she had already retreated to the guest bedroom, a silent choice she had made months ago that he never even questioned. The walls of the apartment held stories of sacrifices that Emily collected, like pages of a never-written diary. The culinary school program interrupted in her final year, the increasingly rare gatherings with friends, family visits, reduced to holidays. All of this had been gradually pruned, like a garden left to die from neglect. That morning something was different. Perhaps it was the extra weight of the silence or the way light entered through the window. But Emily felt that this day held a change. Her eyes scanned the impeccable kitchen, her last refuge where she still allowed herself to create and experiment with recipes, even though Richard never tasted them. There, among sugar and flour, she still found fragments of the woman she used to be. The clock showed 8:47 when she heard the unexpected sound of a key turning in the lock. Richard never came back home at this hour. Her heart raced, not from anticipation, but from a premonition she couldn't name. He entered the kitchen with measured steps, his suit perfectly aligned, carrying a leather portfolio she had never seen before. Without saying a word, Richard placed the portfolio on the table and removed a manila envelope from it. The gesture was mechanical, as if he were in one of his business meetings. Emily observed the envelope slide across the table's surface until it stopped in front of her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched it, but her mind was strangely calm. "These are the divorce papers," he stated, with the same tone he would use to discuss the weather. "Everything's been settled with the lawyers. You just need to sign." Emily opened the envelope with a serenity that surprised herself. The pages were organized with yellow post-its, indicating where she should sign. Typical of Richard, always practical, always efficient. As she read the documents, memories of the last 3 years passed through her mind like a slow-motion film. The hasty marriage, the first disappointments, the frustrated attempts to build a real connection, the empty nights. She took the pen he offered and without hesitation signed each marked page. Each signature was like untying a knot that had been suffocating her for so long. When she finished, she returned the papers to Richard with a gentle, almost kind gesture. "You have until the end of the week to remove your belongings," he informed her, tucking the documents into the portfolio. "I've left a check with enough money for you to establish yourself elsewhere." Emily nodded, still in silence. Richard adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture she recognized from their dating days, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused for a moment, as if wanting to say something more. But true to his nature, he merely nodded slightly in farewell and departed. The sound of the door closing echoed throughout the apartment. Emily remained seated, looking at the now cold coffee cup. Her hands were no longer trembling. For the first time in a long time, she felt something different growing in her chest. Not pain, not anger, not even sadness. It was a sensation of lightness, as if she had been freed from a prison she herself had helped build. The small apartment in the West Side district was only 480 square feet, but for Emily, it represented a universe of possibilities. After collecting her personal belongings, some clothes, cookbooks inherited from her grandmother, and her basic baking equipment, she moved out without looking back. The check Richard had left remained untouched in her purse. She had decided not to use that money. She preferred to start over with her own savings, secretly kept during the years of marriage. The move happened on a rainy Thursday. Emily watched. The droplets run down the window of her new home while organizing the small kitchen. Each utensil found its place with surgical precision. Mixers, pans, sieves, like pieces of a puzzle that was starting to make sense. The aroma of vanilla already permeated the air. She had made sure to bake a cake as soon as she arrived, as if wanting to mark her territory, to transform that impersonal space into something of her own. It was during this organization that the first dizzy spell hit her. Emily needed to lean on the kitchen counter, breathing deeply while the world spun slightly around her. She attributed the discomfort to the stress of recent days, to the abrupt change in her life. But a persistent little voice in her mind whispered another possibility, one she wasn't yet ready to consider. The following days were filled with adaptation and discoveries. Emily renewed contact with old friends, surprised by the naturalness with which her calls were welcomed, as if time hadn't passed. Sarah, her best friend from college days, was the first to visit her in the new apartment. "This place has your personality," Sarah commented, sitting at the small kitchen table tasting a cupcake fresh from the oven. "Cozy, full of character, totally different from that cold mansion where you lived." Emily smiled, but the smile faltered when another wave of dizziness hit her. Sarah immediately noticed the change in her friend's expression. "That's the third time you've gotten like this since I arrived," Sarah observed, concerned. "And don't come at me with that stress story. How late is your period?" The question hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. She had avoided doing the math, but now, forced to think about it, reality imposed itself. 6 weeks. She was 6 weeks late. "I bought a test," Sarah announced, pulling a small box from her purse. "I figured you'd be too busy reinventing yourself to think about this." Emily took the test with trembling hands. 15 minutes later, sitting in the small bathroom of her new apartment, she stared at the positive result with a complex mixture of emotions. Silent tears ran down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness or despair. It was as if her body was releasing all the tension accumulated over the past few years. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked softly, sitting beside her on the bathroom floor. Emily took a deep breath, wiping away tears with the backs of her hands. Her gaze wandered to the small kitchen visible through the open bathroom door, lingering on the carefully organized recipe books on the shelf, the gleaming baking pans, the containers of ingredients labeled in her neat handwriting. "I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago," she replied with a certainty she didn't know she possessed. "I'm going to fulfill my dream. I'm going to open my own bakery." Sarah squeezed her hand in silence, a gesture that carried more support than 1,000 words could express. Through the window, the afternoon sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in rosy hues. Emily placed her hand on her still flat belly, feeling a current of energy run through her body. This wasn't the end she had imagined for her marriage, but perhaps it was exactly the beginning she needed for her life. The sweet aroma of vanilla and cinnamon filled the small space that, after 2 months of renovation, had finally transformed into Emily's delights. Emily proudly observed the result of weeks of intense work. The walls in a soft coral tone, rustic wooden shelves displaying artisanal cakes, the refrigerated display case full of colorful treats, and the welcoming counter where customers could enjoy her creations with a cup of specialty coffee. Her savings, combined with a small loan, allowed her to rent and renovate the former florist space in the heart of the neighborhood. Sarah, who had become her minority partner, had insisted on keeping some elements of the old establishment, like the vertical garden on the back wall and the large windows that let natural light flood the environment. Her 4-month baby bump was beginning to show discreetly under her personalized apron, but Emily had chosen to keep the pregnancy a secret from customers, not out of shame, but because she wanted her work to speak for itself. The recipes she had developed were a mixture of emotional memories, cakes and sweets her grandmother had taught her, with contemporary touches she added after hours of research and experimentation. "You need to try this," Emily said to Sarah, offering a spoon of the filling she had just prepared. It was a combination of Belgian chocolate with red berries and a subtle touch of pink pepper, her newest creation. Sarah closed her eyes as she tasted it, letting out a sigh of approval. "This is different. There's something familiar, but at the same time it's surprising. How do you do it?" Emily smiled, absent-mindedly caressing her belly. "I think it's like life. Sometimes we need to mix the familiar with the new to create something special." The doorbell chimed, announcing the first customer of the day. Emily adjusted her apron and prepared to welcome them, but her words of greeting died in her throat. Standing at the door was a tall man with broad shoulders, wearing a well-cut suit that couldn't hide his casual nature. His eyes, a deep green that she knew so well, looked at her with a mixture of surprise and recognition. "Emily?" Michael's voice sounded exactly as she remembered, deep, melodious, with that slight accent from his small hometown that years of living in the big city hadn't erased. Time seemed to freeze. 10 years had passed since the last time she saw him when he left for London in pursuit of his big opportunity in the financial market. At the time, they were too young, full of different dreams that pointed in opposite directions. The breakup, although painful, had seemed like the only sensible option. "Michael," she finally managed to say, her voice steadier than she expected. "What a surprise." He took a few steps into the bakery, his eyes scanning the environment before returning to fix on her. "So you made your dream come true," he commented, a soft smile playing on his lips. "I always knew that one day you'd have your own place." Sarah, sensing the intensity of the moment, discreetly retreated to the kitchen, leaving them alone in the main room. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but loaded with unspoken memories, with possibilities that had been suspended in time. "What brings you back?" Emily asked, busying herself with arranging some treats in the display case to disguise the trembling in her hands. Michael's smile faded slightly. "I came back a few weeks ago. My sister, Olivia, He paused, taking a deep breath. "I needed to come back to take care of some things." Emily felt the weight in his words. Olivia, who was practically a daughter to Michael since their parents passed away, had always been a bright presence in the lives of everyone who knew her. Something in his expression said that story had more layers of pain than he was ready to share. In the weeks following the unexpected reunion, Michael became a constant presence at the bakery. He always arrived at the same time, shortly after lunch when business was quieter. He would sit at the corner table by the window and order a coffee with whatever treat Emily suggested. Sometimes he stayed for hours, working on his laptop. Other times, he just watched the street traffic, lost in thought. Emily noticed how different he was from the young man she had known. His professional success was evident in his elegant clothes and the discreet but expensive watch he wore. However, there was a melancholy in his eyes that hadn't existed before, a shadow that appeared especially when he was distracted, looking at the vertical garden, which reminded him so much of the garden Olivia used to tend. On a particularly quiet afternoon, as she organized a new shipment of ingredients, Michael approached the counter with a different, lighter expression. "You know what this reminds me of?" he asked, pointing to the cinnamon cake she had just placed in the display case. "That afternoon at your grandmother's house, when we tried to make a cake and almost set the kitchen on fire." Emily laughed, remembering the episode. "You confused tablespoon with cup in the flour measurement. And you were so determined to teach me how to make the icing that you didn't even notice the cake was burning," he added, his eyes sparkling with the memory. The moment of levity was interrupted by a sudden wave of nausea that hit Emily. She tried to hide it, but her reflexes betrayed her, and she needed to lean on the counter for support. Michael immediately came around the counter, gently holding her arm. "Are you okay?" The concern in his voice was genuine. Before she could answer, Sarah emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of fresh cupcakes. Seeing the scene, she dropped everything on the counter and rushed to help her friend. "Em, you need to sit down for a bit," Sarah said firmly, giving a meaningful look at the apron that was no longer hiding Emily's baby bump completely. Michael, noticing something he hadn't seen before, took a step back, his eyes fixed on Emily's silhouette with a mixture of surprise and understanding. "You're," he began, but didn't complete the sentence. Emily nodded slowly, sitting in one of the chairs Sarah had brought over. 5 months, she confirmed, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. The silence that followed was dense, loaded with unasked questions. Michael ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that Emily recognized from when he was processing difficult information. The father, he hesitated, clearly uncomfortable about asking the question. "Doesn't know," Emily replied simply. and for now I prefer to keep it that way." Michael nodded, respecting her decision even without fully understanding. His eyes, however, couldn't look away from the small bump that he now clearly noticed under the apron. "Has it been difficult?" he asked softly, pulling up a chair to sit beside her. Emily smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "Different than I imagined, but not difficult. Actually, it's been liberating." At that moment, a group of customers entered the bakery, bringing with them the buzz of animated conversations. Sarah quickly took over the service, leaving Emily and Michael in their moment of confidences. "You've always been the strongest person I've ever known," Michael commented, his voice loaded with an admiration that went beyond the present moment. "Even when we were young, you had this incredible ability to transform challenges into opportunities." Emily felt her heart race at his words, not just from the compliment, but from the way he looked at her, as if he was seeing not just who she was now, but all the versions of her he had known over the years. The success of Emily's delights grew organically. What started with neighborhood customers soon expanded to event orders and parties. Emily developed a special line of functional desserts designed with pregnant women like herself in mind, who wanted to satisfy their sweet cravings without compromising their health. This decision proved to be an unexpected differentiator, attracting a loyal and specific audience. On a particularly busy morning, while finishing a special order of mini brownies for a corporate event, Emily noticed a discreet gentleman sitting at one of the back tables. He was methodically tasting each item he ordered, making notes in a small black notebook. His face seemed vaguely familiar, perhaps from a magazine or television program. Sarah, who had just returned from a delivery, approached the counter hurriedly, her eyes wide with excitement. Do you know who that gentleman is?" she whispered, leaning in closer. "It's Anthony Matthews, the most respected food critic in the city. He writes for all the major magazines in the country." Emily's heart raced. She had followed Anthony's reviews during her culinary studies, admiring his ability to describe not just the taste of dishes, but the history and emotion behind each creation. Michael, arriving for his usual visit, immediately noticed the different atmosphere in the place. With years of experience in the corporate world, he instantly recognized the critic. He approached the counter where Emily was standing, placing his hand discreetly on her shoulder in a gesture of support. "Take a deep breath," he murmured. "You're doing exactly what you've always dreamed of, and you're doing it very well." Michael's touch on her shoulder sent an electric current through her body. In recent days, his presence had become more than a comfort. It was an anchor, a constant reminder that she wasn't alone on this journey. The moment was interrupted when Anthony Matthews stood up and walked to the counter. His austere face broke into a surprisingly warm smile. "Miss Emily," he asked, extending his hand, "I'd like to congratulate you. It's been a long time since I found a place that manages to combine tradition and innovation so well. That spice cake with red berry sauce, it reminded me of the cakes my grandmother used to make, but with a completely contemporary touch." Emily felt her legs tremble slightly, grateful for Michael's steady presence beside her. "Thank you, Mr. Matthews. It's an honor to have you here." "Please call me Anthony," he smiled, taking a card from his pocket. "I'd like to place some special orders for events I organize, and if you'll allow me, I intend to write about this charming place in my next column." When the critic said goodbye, Emily needed to sit down. The emotion combined with pregnancy fatigue left her momentarily breathless. Michael immediately brought her a glass of water, while Sarah practically danced with joy around the bakery. "This is incredible, Em," Sarah exclaimed. "A review from Anthony Matthews can change everything." Emily nodded, still processing what had just happened. Her gaze met Michael's, who was watching her with an expression that mixed pride and something else, something she wasn't yet ready to name. "I think we need to celebrate," he suggested, his eyes shining. "How about dinner? I know a quiet place with an incredible view of the city." The invitation hung in the air, loaded with possibilities. Emily felt her heart race again, but for completely different reasons. Before she could respond, the bakery door opened, and a familiar figure entered, making the blood freeze in her veins. Richard was standing at the entrance, his gaze alternating between her now visible belly, and Michael at her side. The air in the room suddenly became heavy, loaded with unresolved tension and unspoken words. The silence that settled in the bakery was almost palpable. Sarah, sensing the tension, began discreetly dismissing the few customers who were still in the shop, turning the sign on the door to closed. Michael remained at Emily's side, his presence a silent fortress. Richard took a few steps into the establishment, his eyes fixed on Emily's belly. His face, normally impassive, showed a mixture of emotions she had never seen before. "How far along?" he asked, his voice controlled, but with an underlying note of tension. Emily straightened in her chair, one hand instinctively protecting her belly. 5.5 months. The calculation was simple. The child had been conceived during the marriage. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, processing the information. When he reopened them, his gaze was different, almost vulnerable. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, taking another step toward her. Michael visibly tensed, but Emily lightly touched his arm, a silent request to let her handle the situation. "Tell you?" Emily repeated, her voice surprisingly calm. "Richard, in the last months of our marriage, you barely looked at me. We went weeks without having a real conversation. When you handed me the divorce papers, you didn't even ask how I was doing." Richard ran his hand over his face, a rare gesture of discomfort. "Things were complicated." "No, they weren't," Emily responded, slowly standing up. "They were very simple, actually. You never wanted a real marriage. You wanted a convenient partnership. I tried to be what you wanted. I molded my life to fit your standards, but it was never enough." The air conditioner hummed softly in the background, the only sound in the tension-filled environment. Sarah watched the scene from the kitchen door, ready to intervene if necessary. Michael remained silent, respecting the moment, but his posture indicated he was alert to any movement. "I started therapy," Richard said abruptly. "After you left, I realized some things. I have the right to participate in my child's life." Emily felt a wave of contradictory emotions: anger, sadness, a touch of pity. "Participate?" she questioned softly. "Like you participated in our marriage? Showing up when convenient, maintaining emotional distance, treating everything like an obligation to be fulfilled?" Richard took a step back as if he had received a physical blow. His eyes scanned the bakery environment, noticing for the first time the details: the photographs on the walls, the careful arrangements in the display cases, the welcoming aroma of cinnamon and vanilla. "You built all this by yourself," he noted, a touch of involuntary admiration in his voice. "No," Emily corrected, a small smile appearing on her lips. "Not by myself. I built it with people who really care, who are present not out of obligation but by choice." Her gaze met Michael's for a moment, and something passed between them. A mutual understanding, a silent recognition of feelings that were beginning to bloom. Richard noticed the exchange of glances and his face closed again. He took a card from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "My lawyer will contact you to discuss the terms of shared custody." Before he could turn to leave, Emily took a step forward. "Richard," she called, her voice firm, "you can participate in this child's life, but it will be on my terms. I won't allow her to grow up feeling invisible or inadequate like I felt during our marriage." A muscle twitched in Richard's jaw, but he nodded briefly before leaving. The doorbell chimed with his departure, and Emily felt her legs weaken. Michael immediately supported her, guiding her back to the chair. Anthony Matthews's review was published on a Sunday, occupying 2 full pages of the most important newspaper's food section. The elegant and sensitive text not only praised the flavors and technique of Emily's creations, but also captured the essence of the place. There are establishments that serve desserts, and there are places that serve sugared memories. Emily's Delights belongs to the latter category. Each creation tells a story. Each flavor awakens a memory. The impact was immediate. On Monday, a line formed at the door before the bakery even opened. Sarah had to hurriedly hire 2 extra attendants, while Emily worked tirelessly in the kitchen to maintain the quality and standard of each item. "We need more space," Sarah commented on a particularly busy afternoon, balancing 3 trays of cupcakes and more stuff. "And we definitely need a better organization system." Emily nodded, wiping her sweaty forehead while finishing another batch of cookies. Her body, now almost 6 months pregnant, was beginning to protest against the long hours, standing. That's when she felt a familiar presence behind her. "Got a minute?" Michael asked softly, his face concerned as he noticed her evident fatigue. She followed him to the small room in the back that served as an improvised office. Michael was carrying a folder of documents and had that expression she knew well from their youth, the same one he made when he had an idea he couldn't contain. "I have a proposal," he began, opening the folder on the desk. "Actually 2. First, I want to help professionalize the bakery's management. I can implement systems, train the team, establish processes, at no charge, of course. It would be my contribution to the business." Emily sat down, feeling the baby move as if also interested in the conversation. "And the second proposal?" Michael hesitated for a moment, his green eyes fixed on hers. "There's a property for sale, 3 blocks from here. An old house with a garden in the back. The space is 3 times larger than this, and with some renovations it could become not just a larger bakery, but also a cafe school where you could teach classes, share your knowledge." Emily's heart raced. The idea of expanding the business had already crossed her mind, but the financial reality always made her pull back. "Michael, I can't afford to—" "I can," he gently interrupted. "And before you say no, it's not a gift. It's an investment. We'll be partners, 50% each. You maintain total creative autonomy and kitchen management. I'll handle the administrative and financial part." Emily stood up, walking to the small window. The afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, reminding her of the frosting on one of her favorite cakes. Her mind was in a whirlwind. "Why?" she finally asked, turning to face him. "Why do this?" Michael stood up too, approaching her with measured steps. "Because I believe in you, I always have, and because—" He paused, as if carefully choosing his words. "Because since I came back, since I found you again, I feel like I'm finally in the right place." The air between them became charged with electricity. Emily could feel the heat emanating from his body so close to hers. For a moment it was as if the 10 years that separated them had never existed. "And there's one more thing," Michael continued, his voice softer. "The house has an apartment upstairs. It would be perfect for you and the baby. More space, more security, and close to work." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. They weren't tears of sadness or confusion, but of recognition that sometimes life offers second chances disguised as challenges. "I need to think," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Michael smiled, that smile she knew so well that illuminated not just his face but seemed to warm the entire environment. "Of course, take all the time you need, but know that regardless of your decision about the partnership, I want to help. Not because you need it, but because you deserve all the possible support to make your dream grow even more." 1 week after Michael's proposal, Emily decided to see the property. The house was even more impressive than she had imagined, a 1940s construction with high ceilings, large windows, and a garden that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. The upstairs apartment was spacious and airy, with a balcony overlooking the garden. "This space," Michael explained, as they walked through, "the ground floor, could be transformed into the main area of the bakery. That side room would be perfect for classes and workshops, and look at this garden. It would make an incredible outdoor cafe." Emily observed everything with dreamy eyes, already visualizing the possibilities. Her heart beat faster, not just from the excitement of the project, but from the way Michael talked about the future, a future that increasingly seemed to include the two of them. "What happened to Olivia?" she asked softly, when they sat on a bench in the garden. The question had been hanging between them for weeks, and Emily felt it was the right time to better understand the pain that sometimes clouded his eyes. Michael was silent for a moment, his fingers playing idly with a fallen leaf. It was a stroke completely unexpected. She was doing so well, had just graduated from medical school, had her whole life ahead of her. Emily covered his hand with hers, feeling how he trembled slightly. "I was in London when it happened," he continued, his voice choked. "I couldn't get here in time to say goodbye. After that, I couldn't stay there anymore. Every place reminded me that I wasn't here when she needed me most." "It wasn't your fault," Emily whispered, squeezing his hand. "I know. Rationally, I know. But it still hurts. Olivia was more than my sister. She was my best friend, my confidant. She was the one who encouraged me to come back, you know. In our last conversations, she always said I seemed incomplete, that I had left something important behind." Their gazes met, and Emily felt her heart skip a beat. At that moment, the baby gave a particularly strong kick, causing her to let out a small exclamation of surprise. "What is it?" Michael asked, concerned. In response, she took his hand and placed it on her belly. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the baby moved again as if greeting the touch. Michael's face lit up with a smile of pure enchantment. "This is amazing," he whispered, fascinated by the sensation. "She's been more active lately," Emily commented, not realizing she had revealed the baby's gender. "She?" Michael asked, his eyes shining. Emily blushed slightly. "Yes, I found out at the last ultrasound. I hadn't told anyone yet, not even Sarah." "A girl," he repeated softly, his hand still on her belly. "Have you chosen a name?" Emily hesitated for a moment, then replied, "I was thinking of Olivia." The sound that escaped Michael's throat was a mixture of laughter and sob. His eyes filled with tears, but his face radiated a joy that Emily hadn't seen since he returned. "You don't have to," he began, but she interrupted him. "I want to, if you don't mind, of course. Olivia has always been a special name for me, and now, well, now it has an even deeper meaning." Michael looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. Slowly, as if asking permission, he leaned toward her. Emily closed her eyes, feeling his breath getting closer and closer. The moment was interrupted by the shrill ring of a cell phone. Emily and Michael abruptly pulled away, the charm of the moment broken by the intrusion of the outside world. It was her phone. Richard's law office. "Hello?" Emily answered, her voice still trembling from the intensity of the previous moment. The voice on the other end of the line was professional and direct. The lawyer wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss the terms of shared custody. Richard was willing to offer substantial financial support, but demanded active participation in decisions related to the child. Michael observed the change in Emily's expression as she listened. His fingers, which moments before had felt the gentle movements of the baby, were now tensely intertwined in his lap. After hanging up, Emily remained silent for a few moments, her gaze lost in the garden before her. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of the trees, creating dancing patterns on the ground. "Richard wants to set up a meeting," she finally said, "to discuss custody." Michael adjusted himself on the bench, maintaining a respectful distance, but his presence remained comforting. "How do you feel about that?" "Confused," she admitted. "On one hand, it's good that he wants to participate. Olivia deserves to have a present father, but on the other..." She paused, looking for the right words. "I'm afraid he'll treat fatherhood the way he treated our marriage, like an obligation, something to be managed and controlled." "You're not alone in this," Michael spoke softly. "Whatever your decision, I'll be here to support you." Emily turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why are you like this, so present, so genuine?" "Because that's who I am," he answered simply. "And because some feelings don't change with time. They just mature like a good wine." The silence that followed was different from the previous one. It wasn't loaded with unresolved tension, but with mutual understanding, with truths that were beginning to surface. "About the business proposal," Emily began, deliberately changing the subject. "I've thought a lot about it, and I think we can make it work. But I need to maintain my independence. I need to know I can make decisions about the bakery without feeling controlled." Michael gently completed. "The last thing I want is to limit you, My proposal is precisely to give more wings to your dreams, not to clip your wings. At that moment, a group of birds took flight from the garden, their wings beating in sync against the orange sky of dusk. Emily watched them, thoughtful. "We'll need a very well-drawn contract," she said finally. "Something that protects everyone involved." "Of course," Michael agreed. "We can look for an independent lawyer, someone who exclusively takes care of our commercial interests." Emily nodded, then stood up from the bench, walking to an old rose bush that grew in a corner of the garden. Its flowers, though a bit wild from the lack of care, still displayed a delicate and vibrant pink. "You know what enchants me most about this place?" she asked, gently touching one of the roses. "The potential. It's as if I can feel all the possibilities, all the stories that will still happen here." Michael joined her, maintaining a respectful distance, but his presence was like a magnetic field, subtly attracting her. "Stories like baking classes for children," he suggested, "or afternoon tea in the garden, intimate weddings. All of that," Emily smiled, her face lighting up with the enthusiasm of possibilities. "And more. We can have a space for special events, themed workshops. Can you imagine how this garden would look decorated for a baby shower?" Their eyes met again, and this time there was something different in the air. Not just the chemistry that had always existed between them, but a promise of future, of shared dreams. The meeting with the lawyers was scheduled for a rainy Thursday. Emily arrived at the elegant office in the city centre, feeling the weight of the moment. Sarah had insisted on accompanying her, but she preferred to face it alone. Or almost alone. Little Olivia moved in her belly, as if to remind her that she would never be truly alone. Richard was already in the meeting room, accompanied by his lawyer. Something in his posture was different, less rigid, more human. He stood up when Emily entered, pulling out a chair for her to sit. "Are you okay?" he asked, and for the first time in years he seemed genuinely interested in the answer. "I am," she replied simply, settling into the chair. The meeting proceeded in a surprisingly civilized manner. Richard presented his proposal. In addition to financial support, he wanted to participate in important decisions, have the right to regular visits after the birth, be consulted on health and education issues. "I've also started attending a support group for fathers," he mentioned, almost shyly. "I'm learning a lot about responsible fatherhood, about effective presence." Emily observed him with a mixture of surprise and caution. It was as if she were meeting a different version of Richard, one she had always hoped to meet during their marriage. "Why now?" she asked softly. "Why this change?" Richard was silent for a moment, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "Therapy has helped me understand many things, about myself, about how I was raised, about the patterns I repeated without realizing. I don't want our daughter to grow up with an emotionally absent father like I did." The sincerity in his voice caught Emily by surprise. For the first time, she saw vulnerability in her ex-husband's eyes, a genuine acknowledgement of his mistakes. "And there's one more thing," Richard continued hesitantly. "I saw you the other day at the bakery. With that Michael," Emily completed. "Yes, Michael. I saw how he looks at you, how you interact. It's different. It's real. It's the kind of connection I never knew how to build, that I never understood the importance of. But now I understand. And I want to be better, not for you, but for our daughter." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. They weren't tears of sadness or regret, but of relief. Relief to see that some people really can change, can grow. "Olivia," she said softly. "What?" "Her name. I chose Olivia." Richard smiled slightly. "It's a beautiful name. Strong." The meeting continued with practical discussions about agreements and documents, but something had changed in the air. An old tension had dissipated, replaced by mutual understanding, a renewed respect. When she left the office, the rain had given a break. Emily breathed deeply the clean air that follows a storm. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Michael. "How was it? Want company?" An involuntary smile appeared on her lips. She was about to respond when she noticed a familiar movement in her belly. It was as if Olivia was also responding, giving her own sign of approval. "Can we meet at the cafe near the office?" she typed. "I have news about everything." The answer came almost instantaneously. "On my way. And M, whatever the news." "As I'm here." Emily put the phone in her purse, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. In front of her, a rainbow was beginning to form in the city sky, as if nature wanted to symbolize that sometimes the greatest beauties emerge after the most intense storms. The renovation of the old house was progressing at a rapid pace. Michael had hired a team specialized in restoring historic properties, ensuring that every detail was preserved while adapting the space for its new function. The garden, once abandoned, was coming to life under the care of a landscaper Emily had personally selected. "The original floor in the main room is a treasure," commented the architect, pointing to the mosaic of hydraulic tiles they had discovered under layers of old carpet. "With proper restoration, it will be stunning." Emily walked through the space under construction, her 7-month belly now very pronounced, imagining how each area would look. The old library would be transformed into a practical classroom with marble countertops and professional equipment. The living room would become the main cafe, keeping the original fireplace as a focal point. Sarah was supervising the installation of the industrial kitchen equipment, ensuring everything was according to the exact specifications Emily had planned. "Look at this," she called, excited. "The ovens have arrived, and they're exactly as you wanted." The upstairs apartment was also undergoing transformations. Michael had insisted on adding a discreet elevator, thinking of Emily and the baby's comfort. The rooms were painted in soft tones, and the largest one, intended for the baby, had a privileged view of the garden. "I was thinking," Michael commented one afternoon, as they reviewed the plans in the temporary office set up in one of the rooms, "we could use the back veranda space for private events. It would be perfect for small celebrations, baby showers." He stopped talking when he noticed that Emily was distracted, caressing her belly with a worried expression. "Everything okay?" he asked, immediately approaching. "Yes," she smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her belly. "Olivia is especially active today. I think she's also anxious about all these changes." The touch lasted longer than necessary, their gazes meeting with an intensity that was becoming increasingly frequent. Since that afternoon in the garden, something had changed between them. It was as if they had silently agreed to let feelings grow naturally, without rushing. "I received another franchise proposal today," Emily commented, gently breaking the moment. "A luxury hotel chain wants our desserts in all of their restaurants." "And what do you think?" Michael asked, sitting beside her. "I don't know. It's tempting, financially speaking, but I'm afraid of losing the essence of what we've built. Each dessert I make has a story, a personal touch. How do I maintain that in large-scale production?" Michael smiled, that smile that always made Emily's heart skip a beat. "That's why you're special, you know. Many business people would think only about the numbers, but you think about the soul of the business." A noise in the construction called their attention. The foreman had arrived with news about the restoration of the winter garden, an area Emily planned to transform into a space for special afternoon teas. "We found something interesting during the roof cleaning," the man commented, handing Emily a small object wrapped in a piece of cloth. It was an antique music box, delicately crafted in wood and metal. Despite the years, the mechanism still worked, playing a soft melody that filled the environment. "They say this house belonged to a family of musicians," Michael commented, watching Emily examine the box with fascination. "Maybe we can incorporate that somehow into the concept of the place." "I know," Emily exclaimed, her eyes shining with that light that always appeared when she had a new idea. "We can have a musical theme for our creations, each line of desserts inspired by a different style of music. Imagine the classical line with elegant and refined desserts, the jazz line with unexpected combinations of flavors." Her enthusiasm was contagious. Michael watched her talk, animatedly gesturing, and felt his heart expand with a certainty that had been growing for weeks. He was irremediably in love with her. Not with the memory of the young woman he had known years ago, but with this strong, creative and determined woman she had become. The inauguration of the new Emily's Delights was scheduled for 3 weeks from then, coinciding with the beginning of spring. Emily, now 8 months pregnant, coordinated the preparations with a mixture of enthusiasm and anxiety. The musical menu, as she began to call her new line of creations, was almost complete. "Try this," she asked Sarah, offering a spoon of a new recipe. "It's what I'm calling chocolate sonata, dark chocolate with orange notes and a touch of sea salt." Sarah closed her eyes as she tasted it, letting out a sigh of approval. It's like a symphony in your mouth. Each flavor appears at the right moment, like different instruments in an orchestra." Richard, who had become a more constant and less tense presence in her life, also regularly tasted the new creations. During one of his weekly visits to follow the development of the pregnancy, he surprised Emily with an unexpected suggestion. "What do you think about including music classes for pregnant women in the space?" he asked, observing the antique music box that now decorated one of the shelves. "I read some studies about the benefits of classical music for babies. We could create a special program, combining your baking classes with musical sessions." Emily looked at him with surprise. It was the first time Richard had shown genuine interest in the creative aspect of the business. "It's an interesting idea," she admitted. "We could partner with music teachers." "I can help with that," Michael softly interrupted, entering the room. "Olivia was a violinist. She gave lessons to children. I know several musicians through her." A delicate silence fell over the room. It was the first time Michael had mentioned his sister in Richard's presence. Richard, sensing the importance of the moment, merely nodded respectfully. "Well, I need to go," Richard announced, standing up. "I have therapy in half an hour. Don't forget the appointment with the obstetrician on Monday." After he left, Michael approached Emily, who was organizing some dessert samples for a tasting that would happen later. "How are you?" he asked, noticing she seemed more tired than usual. "Fine," she answered automatically, then stopped, correcting herself. "Actually, a bit overwhelmed. There's so much happening at once. The inauguration, the baby, the new recipes." Michael gently took the plate from her hands, placing it on the counter. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. "I want to show you something." He led her to the winter garden, now completely restored. The afternoon sun entered through the colored stained glass, creating dancing patterns on the floor. In the center of the space, there was an antique piano she had never seen before. "It was Olivia's," Michael explained, his voice soft. "It's been stored all these years. I thought this would be the perfect place for it." Emily gently touched, the keys producing loose notes that echoed through the environment. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You know what Olivia always said." Michael continued, sitting on the piano bench and inviting Emily to sit beside him. "That music, like love, doesn't need to be perfect to be true. Sometimes it's the small imperfections that make something unique." Their gazes met, and Emily felt her heart race. Michael was so close that she could feel his warmth, count the shades of green in his eyes. He began, his voice almost a whisper. "I know it might be too soon, that there's a lot happening in your life right now, but I need to say, At that moment, Emily felt a strong contraction, different from the ones she had been having in recent days. Her face must have shown pain, because Michael immediately became alarmed. "What is it? Is everything okay?" "I think," she breathed, deeply feeling another contraction, "I think Olivia has decided she wants to participate in this moment too." The hospital was strangely calm for a Thursday afternoon. Michael drove with extra care, casting worried glances at Emily in the passenger seat, who was breathing deeply between contractions. Sarah had already been notified and was on her way, bringing the bag Emily had left prepared at home. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Emily murmured between controlled breaths. "There are still 3 weeks left. The inauguration can wait," Michael gently interrupted her, parking the car at the emergency entrance. "Now, what's important is the two of you." In the emergency room, everything happened quickly. The medical team was already alerted. Emily's obstetrician had been contacted during the journey. While they filled out the admission form, Michael held Emily's hand, offering silent support. I need to notify Richard, she remembered. Between one contraction and another, he has the right to be here. Michael nodded, already taking out his cell phone to make the call. His heart tightened a bit at the thought that he would have to share this moment, but he knew it was the right thing to do. Emily observed the kindness of this gesture, feeling a wave of affection for him. Richard arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing the suit from the meeting he had interrupted. His normally contained face showed genuine concern. "How is she?" he asked Michael, who was waiting in the corridor while Emily was being examined. "The contractions are regular. The doctor said labor is progressing quickly." The two men stayed, in silence, one on each side of the corridor, united by their concern for Emily and the baby. Sarah arrived shortly after, bringing not just the bag, but also a small teddy bear she had bought at the hospital gift shop. The following hours were an emotional roller coaster. Emily alternated between moments of surprising strength and touching vulnerability. In a particularly intense moment, she held Michael and Richard's hands, one on each side of the bed. "You two," she said, between labored breaths, "need to promise me something. No matter what happens, Olivia deserves to have all of us in harmony. In her life, do you promise?" The two men exchanged a glance over the bed, years of unresolved tension giving way to mutual understanding. "We promise," they answered in unison. The birth itself was quick and intense. Olivia came into the world at 7:43 p.m. with a strong cry that filled the room with indescribable joy. She was small but healthy, with a surprising amount of dark hair and delicate features that resembled Emily. "She's perfect," whispered Emily, tears streaming down her face as she held her daughter for the first time. Richard, who had permission to be present at the moment of birth as the father, was visibly moved. It was as if in that instant, all the layers of coldness he had built over the years melted away before the small life he had helped create. Outside the room, Michael waited anxiously with Sarah. When the nurse finally came out to give the news, she found him pacing back and forth, his face a mixture of concern and expectation. "They're fine," the nurse smiled. "Mother and baby are doing great." Sarah hugged Michael, who let out a sigh of relief that he didn't even know he was holding. His heart was divided between joy for Olivia's birth and a bittersweet feeling, the awareness that technically he was nothing more than a family friend at that moment. When they were finally allowed to enter the room, they found Emily reclined in the bed, with Olivia in her arms. Richard was sitting in a nearby chair, observing his daughter with an expression of reverence. "Do you want to meet your godmother?" Emily asked as soon as she saw Sarah, who immediately began to cry. Then her eyes met Michael's. "And do you want to hold her?" The moment Michael took Olivia in his arms was magical. The baby, who was slightly agitated, instantly calmed in his arms. He observed her with a mixture of love and wonder, as if he were holding the most precious of treasures. The first days after Olivia's birth were a whirlwind of emotions and adaptations. Emily and the baby were discharged from the hospital 2 days later, and the decision of where they would go generated a surprisingly friendly discussion among all involved. "The apartment above the bakery isn't fully ready yet," Sarah argued. Concerned, "She can stay at my house," Richard offered. "I have a guest room prepared and I hired a nurse to help." But it was Michael who presented the solution that everyone ended up agreeing was the best. "My family's house in Oakwood Hills is empty. It's spacious and fully furnished. It's a 10-minute drive from the bakery and has a wonderful garden. You can stay there until the apartment is ready." Emily looked at him with gratitude. Michael's parents' house, where they had spent so many happy moments in their youth, was perfect. It had enough space for everyone who wanted to help, including Sarah and Emily's mother, who would come to spend a few weeks with them. The days transformed into a delicate routine. Richard appeared every morning before work to see Olivia, often bringing breakfast for everyone. His transformation was visible. The rigid and controlling man gave way to an attentive father who didn't mind having his tie stained with milk or making faces to draw smiles from his daughter. Michael, in turn, divided his time between supervising the final works at the bakery and being present for Emily and Olivia. Sometimes he arrived in the late afternoon just to sit in the garden with the baby in his arms. telling her stories about her namesake aunt. On one of those afternoons, while Emily was nursing Olivia in the old rocking chair on the porch, Michael appeared with news about the bakery. "The construction is practically ready," he announced, sitting on the nearby bench. "And you won't believe it. That food critic, Anthony Matthews, called asking if he can cover the inauguration for a national magazine." Emily smiled, adjusting Olivia in her arms. "It seems like our worlds are aligning, doesn't it?" "Ours?" Michael asked softly, his heart accelerating at her choice of words. Emily blushed slightly but kept her gaze steady. "Yes, ours. Michael, these last few weeks, having you here the way you've been, it means a lot to me." The late afternoon light painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, creating an almost magical atmosphere in the garden. Olivia had fallen, asleep in her mother's arms, her soft breathing creating its own melody. "You know," Emily continued, her voice low so as not to wake the baby, "when I discovered the pregnancy, I was so afraid. Not of the baby itself, but of how I would face everything alone. And then you appeared, as if the universe knew exactly what I needed." Michael stood up, approaching to gently caress Olivia's head. His fingers lightly brushed Emily's arm in the process, sending chills down her skin. "It wasn't a coincidence," he murmured. "That day when I walked into your bakery, I was lost, Emily. After losing Olivia, nothing made sense. But seeing you there, strong, determined, following your dreams, it was like finding the way home." Their gazes met, loaded with contained emotion and unspoken promises. Emily felt her heart race as it always did when he was near. "And now," she asked, her voice barely a whisper, "where does this path lead us?" Michael knelt beside the rocking chair, his eyes level with hers. "Wherever you want to go. I'm in no hurry, Em. We can build this at our own pace, at the rhythm you and Olivia need." The day of the new Emily's Delights inauguration dawned with a radiant sun. The garden, now completely restored, was decorated with arrangements of fresh flowers in pastel tones. The old house had never seemed so alive, with its open windows letting in the soft spring breeze. Emily, with Olivia in her arms, supervised the final details. The baby, now 6 weeks old, was dressed in a delicate pink dress, a gift from Sarah. In the kitchen, the newly hired team worked in sync, preparing the creations that would be served at the inauguration party. "The piano is tuned," Michael announced, entering the main hall. "And the musicians just arrived for rehearsal." Emily smiled, observing how he naturally approached to caress Olivia, who immediately opened a toothless smile upon recognizing him. It was impressive how the baby reacted to his presence, as if they had a special connection from the very first moment. "I can hardly believe we've made it this far," Emily commented, looking around. The space was magnificent. The walls in soft tones were decorated with black and white photographs that told the history of the house, interspersed with images of the bakery's creations. The winter garden had been transformed into an elegant tea room with Olivia's piano occupying a prominent place. "Believe it," Michael smiled, adjusting a strand of hair that escaped from Emily's elegant bun. "You deserve every moment of this." Richard arrived shortly after, carrying an immense arrangement of orchids. "For good luck," he said, placing the flowers on the main counter. His presence, which before would have caused tension, was now received naturally. The therapy sessions and the role of father had really transformed something in him. As the hour of the inauguration approached, Emily's nervousness increased. Sarah noticed and gently took Olivia from her friend's arms. "Go get ready," she insisted. "I'll take care of this little princess." In the upstairs apartment, now completely furnished and decorated, Emily prepared with care. She chose a light blue dress that combined elegance with practicality. After all, she was still breastfeeding. When she finished getting ready, she found Michael waiting at the top of the stairs. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his eyes shining with admiration. Before Emily could respond, they heard the sound of the piano coming from downstairs. Someone was playing a soft, almost familiar melody. Michael immediately recognized it. It was one of his sister Olivia's favorite songs. "The musicians must be doing the sound check," Emily commented, noticing the emotion in his eyes. Michael shook his head slightly. "No, that touch... I know. It well, it's Richard." Surprised, Emily descended the stairs with Michael. Indeed, Richard was at the piano, his fingers sliding over the keys with unexpected skill. Olivia, in Sarah's arms, seemed hypnotized by the music. "I didn't know you played," Emily commented when he finished. Richard gave a shy smile. "I took lessons for years but stopped when I started working. Recently I went back to practicing. My therapist suggested it would be a good form of expression." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of the first guests. The inauguration was officially beginning. Anthony Matthews arrived punctually, accompanied by a team of photographers from the magazine. The critic seemed delighted with the transformation of the space. "Extraordinary," he commented, tasting one of the desserts from the new musical line. "Each flavor really tells a story, evokes a different emotion. And this space, the combination of history, music, and gastronomy, is simply perfect." The event flowed like a well-executed symphony. Guests moved between the garden and the halls, tasting the creations, enjoying the live music, discovering each corner of the space. Emily circulated among the groups, receiving compliments and sharing the story behind each recipe. In a quieter moment, she found herself alone with Michael in the winter garden. The setting sun passed through the stained glass, creating a kaleidoscope of colors on the restored marble floor. "I have something for you," he said, taking a small box from his pocket. Emily looked at the small box in Michael's hands, her heart racing with anticipation. It wasn't a jewelry case as she initially thought, but something different, older. "I found this among Olivia's things," he explained, opening the box delicately. Inside was a delicate silver chain with a pendant in the shape of a musical note. It was our mother's. Olivia always said that one day she would give it to someone special, someone who understood that life is like music, sometimes joyful, sometimes melancholic, but always beautiful in its complexity. With trembling hands, Emily touched the pendant. "Michael, I can't—" "Yes, you can," he gently interrupted. "You brought music back into my life, Em. Not just through your daughter's name, but through who you are, through what you've built here. This place, it's like a melody that was lost and finally found its way back." Silent tears ran down Emily's face as Michael placed the necklace around her neck. The moment was intimate, loaded with meanings that went beyond words. "There's one more thing," he continued, his voice now softer. "Something I've been wanting to tell you for weeks, but it never seemed like the right time." He was interrupted by Sarah, who hurriedly entered the winter garden. "Em, you need to see this." In the main hall, a small crowd was gathering around the piano. Richard was at the instrument again, but this time he wasn't alone. Olivia, in the arms of one of the guests, had just given her first laugh, a crystalline sound that filled the environment with joy. It was when he started playing, the guest explained, moved. She simply burst into laughter. Emily ran to take her daughter, who continued smiling, her little eyes shining with a pure and contagious joy. Richard played softly, clearly moved by his daughter's reaction to his music. Michael observed the scene with a heart overflowing with love. Seeing Emily with Olivia in her arms, surrounded by the music and joy she herself had created in that space, was like witnessing a small miracle. Anthony Matthews, who was also witnessing the moment, made a note in his small notebook. "This," he murmured to his photographer, "this is the true essence of the place. It's not just the desserts or the decoration. It's the soul, the history, the music that echoes in every corner." The event continued into the night, but that moment remained etched in the memory of all present. The old house, which once housed so many stories, now pulsed with a new life, a new melody. Later, when the last guests had already departed, Emily found Michael alone in the garden. He was sitting on the old wooden bench, looking at the stars that were beginning to appear in the velvet sky. "About what you were going to tell me," she began, sitting next to him, "in the winter garden." Michael turned to her, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the garden lights. "I think you already know," he smiled, "but I want to say it anyway. Emily, At that moment, Olivia began to cry inside, her musical cry echoing through the house. Emily smiled, recognizing the time for the last feeding of the day. "I'm not Going anywhere, Michael whispered, gently squeezing her hand. We have all the time in the world. Emily nodded, feeling a deep peace in her heart. She rose to attend to her daughter, but before entering, she turned one last time to Michael. Me too, she said simply, a smile illuminating her face. 6 months had passed since the inauguration. Emily's delights had become an absolute success, with daily lines and reservations made weeks in advance. The class space was always full, with Emily sharing her knowledge between enthusiastic beginners and professionals seeking improvement. On a particularly busy Saturday morning, while preparing her famous chocolate sonata for a wedding, Emily observed through the kitchen window a scene that warmed her heart. Michael was in the garden with Olivia, now 8 months old, showing her the different flowers growing in the flower beds. The baby, who was already crawling with ease, had developed a striking personality. Sweet like her mother's cakes, musical like the aunt she never knew, and curious like the father who now made a point of actively participating in her life. Richard appeared regularly, keeping his word to be present, and had found his own rhythm in fatherhood. "Look who's here," Sarah announced, entering the kitchen with a magazine in hand. Anthony Matthews' article finally came out. Emily wiped her hands on her apron and took the magazine. The report occupied 6 pages, with stunning photos of the space and desserts. But what caught her attention most was the title, Symphony of Flavors: How a Story of New Beginnings Transformed Pain into Sweetness. "He told everything," Sarah commented, reading over Emily's shoulder. "The story of the marriage, the pregnancy, the transformation of the space, but in such a beautiful, respectful way." Emily nodded, moved. Anthony's text perfectly captured the essence of what she had built, not just a bakery, but a space of transformation and healing through flavors and music. Michael entered the kitchen with Olivia in his arms, the little one holding a daisy she had picked from the garden. "Look what your daughter discovered today," he smiled, showing how the baby was trying to put the flower in her own mouth. No, my love," Emily laughed, taking her daughter in her arms. "Flowers are for looking, not for eating. Mommy has something much tastier for you." While feeding Olivia with a homemade fruit puree, another of her creations that was a hit among the mothers who frequented the bakery, Emily observed how her life had completely changed in little more than a year. The apartment above the bakery had become a true home. The walls, once empty, now displayed photos of precious moments. Olivia in her first bath, her first smile, the first time she crawled. There were also photos from the inauguration, special, classes, and a particularly special one, an old photo of Olivia, Michael's sister, playing the violin, which now occupied a place of honor next to the piano. "I have a surprise for you," Michael commented, while helping to clean the kitchen after the last batch of the day came out of the oven. "Actually, it's for all of us." Emily raised an eyebrow, curious. In recent months, she had learned that Michael's surprises were always special. "Remember that franchise proposal you received? The one from the hotel chain," he continued. "Well, I talked to them. Instead of a traditional franchise, I proposed something different, exclusive workshops. You would give special classes at the hotels, sharing not just recipes, but the whole philosophy behind your creations." "Workshops?" Emily repeated, interested. "Yes, they would be special events a few times a year. And the best part, we could make it a family experience. Olivia and I would go with you, turning each trip into a new adventure." Emily's heart raced with the prospect. It was a perfect solution. It would allow her to expand her work without losing the essence of what she had created and would still keep the family together. Olivia's first birthday was celebrated in the bakery's garden on a golden spring afternoon. The space was decorated with fresh flowers and balloons in pastel tones, and the piano played softly in the background. Richard and Michael had prepared a special duet for the occasion. Emily observed the scene with a heart overflowing with joy. Her daughter, wearing a dress that was a miniature replica of what she herself had worn at the inauguration, enchanted everyone with her still unsteady steps and her luminous smile. Sarah ran after her with a camera, trying to capture each precious moment. "She's just like you," commented Emily's mother, who had come especially for the celebration. "She has the same sparkle in her eyes when she smiles." The party was intimate, only with truly special people. Anthony Matthews was there, now no longer as a critic but as a family friend. Some bakery employees, who had become an essential part of that story, also participated in the celebration. When it was time for the cake, a special creation that Emily had prepared with all her love, everyone gathered to sing happy birthday. Olivia, in Michael's arms, clapped animatedly, her little face illuminated by the light of the candles. "Make a wish," Michael whispered in Emily's ear as she prepared to help her daughter blow out the candles. Emily smiled, looking around. What more could she wish for? She had a healthy and happy daughter, a prosperous business that was truly the realization of her dream, loyal friends, and a love that had grown naturally, like a flower that finds the right moment to bloom. After the guests began to disperse, Michael asked for the attention of all who still remained. Richard, who was at the piano, began to play a soft melody, the same one that played on the day Olivia gave her first laugh. "A year ago," Michael began, his voice loaded with emotion, "we celebrated the inauguration of this space. On that day I had something important to say, but the moment wasn't right. Today, looking at everything we've experienced, at the family we've built, I know I couldn't wait any longer." He approached Emily, who was holding Olivia in her arms. The little one immediately extended her arms to him as she always did. Michael took her with a smile, then knelt before Emily. He continued, while Sarah discreetly took Olivia from his arms, "You transformed my life in ways I never imagined possible. You brought music back to my world when everything was silent. You showed me that true love isn't just about grand moments, but about all the little things we build together day by day." Emily felt tears running down her face, but made no move to dry them. Her heart was beating so hard, it seemed to want to accompany the melody that Richard was playing in the background. "I'm not asking to be Olivia's father," Michael continued, "because that's something that happened naturally in its own time. What I'm asking is for the chance to continue writing our story together, to transform each day into a new page of this recipe we're creating. Emily, will you marry me?" Emily's answer didn't come in words. Instead, she knelt down with him, took his face in her hands, and kissed him, a sweet and deep kiss that carried all the promises of the future they would build together. Olivia, in Sarah's arms, let out a crystalline laugh, as if blessing that moment with her pure joy. Richard, at the piano, softly transformed the melody into an instrumental version of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," the favorite song of the original Olivia. And so, in that garden that had witnessed so many transformations, under a sky that was beginning to paint itself with the colors of sunset, a new story was beginning. Not a happy ending, because endings are just illusions, but a new beginning, sweet as the most perfect cake, musical as the most beautiful symphony, and real as the love that blossoms from life's most unexpected experiences. The wedding was celebrated 6 months later, in the same garden where Michael had proposed. Emily chose a special date, the day when the original bakery had first opened its doors, marking the beginning of her transformation journey. The ceremony was intimate, but full of meaning. Olivia, now a year and a half old, was stunning in her little bridesmaid dress, carrying a small basket with rose petals that served more for her to play with than to throw along the path. Her steps were now firmer, and she enchanted everyone with her vivacious personality. Sarah, of course, was the maid of honor, and Richard surprised everyone when Emily invited him to play the piano during the ceremony. He had composed a piece especially for the occasion, a soft melody that blended classical elements with contemporary touches, just like the love story itself that was being celebrated. "Something tells me that Olivia up there is smiling now," Michael whispered to Emily during the exchange of rings, his eyes shining with contained tears. The buffet was entirely prepared by the bakery team, following Emily's special recipes. The wedding cake was a work of art in itself. 5 tiers of pure love, each layer representing a different phase of their story. The base had the flavor of the first dessert Emily created in her bakery. The second tier recalled the favorite flavors of the original Olivia. The third celebrated the birth of little Olivia. The fourth paid homage to the day of the new house's inauguration. And the top was a special creation that Emily had saved precisely for this moment. A delicate combination of vanilla with red berries and a touch of spices, symbolizing the perfect union between the sweet and the unexpected. Anthony Matthews, now a close friend of the family, couldn't resist and did a small coverage of the event for his column. "There are occasions," he wrote, "when life imitates the art of confectionery. Like a perfectly crafted dessert, some loves need time, care, and the exact measure of each ingredient to reach their ideal point." During the party, while the guests delighted in the special creations and music filled the air, Emily and Michael danced softly in the center of the garden. Olivia played nearby, being closely watched by Sarah and Richard, who had developed a respectful friendship based on their love for the little one. "Did you know I received an interesting proposal today?" Emily commented, her head resting on Michael's shoulder. "Really? Tell me more," he responded, curious. "A publisher wants me to write a book, not just recipes, but the whole story. How I transformed pain into sweetness, how I rebuilt my life through baking. They think it might inspire other people." Michael smiled, spinning her gently to the sound of the music. "And what do you think?" "I think it's time to share our story, to show that sometimes endings are just new beginnings in disguise, that happiness can have different flavors than what we initially imagined." At that moment, Olivia ran up to them, her little arms extended, asking to be picked up. Michael took her, bringing her into the dance. The three now spun together, laughing, creating another precious memory in that garden that had witnessed so many transformations. 1 year after the wedding, Emily's delights had transformed into a true empire of sweetness and music. The workshops at luxury hotels were so successful that there was a waiting list. Emily traveled with Michael and Olivia, turning each destination into a new family adventure. On an especially busy afternoon, while preparing a new recipe in development, Emily observed her 2.5-year-old daughter sitting at the piano with Richard. It was her father's visitation day, and he was patiently teaching the little one the basic notes. Olivia, with her musical nature, absorbed each lesson with enthusiasm. "Mommy, look!" Olivia called excitedly, playing a simple sequence of notes she had just learned. Michael, who was organizing the accounting at a nearby table, looked up with a proud smile. The scene was a perfect portrait of what they had built, an unconventional family united by love and mutual respect. Emily's book had been published 3 months earlier and was already in its 2nd edition. Sugar Symphonies wasn't just a recipe book, but a testimony of how life can surprise us with its own recipes for happiness. "I have news," Emily announced during dinner that night, after Olivia was already sleeping. Michael noticed something different in her smile, a special sparkle in her eyes. "Are you?" he asked, his heart accelerating with the possibility. Emily nodded, tears of joy shining in her eyes. "Pregnant. I found out this morning." Michael hugged her tightly, his heart overflowing with happiness. "Olivia will love having a little brother or sister," he whispered. "Actually," Emily smiled, "I think she already knows. Earlier today, while I was preparing the desserts, she put her hand on my belly and said, 'There's music in here, Mummy.' That's when I decided to take the test." The news was received with joy by everyone. Sarah was already beginning to plan a themed baby shower. Richard offered to compose a special song for the new family member, and Anthony Matthews joked, saying they would need to add a new chapter to the book. That night, lying in bed with Michael, Emily reflected on how life had changed. The pain of the past hadn't simply disappeared, it had transformed like ingredients that, combined in the right measure, create something new and special. "What are you thinking about?" Michael asked softly, his hand resting on her still flat belly. "About how funny life is," she replied. 3 years ago, when I signed those divorce papers, I thought it was the end. Little did I know, it was just the first ingredient in a much more special recipe." Michael smiled, perfectly understanding what she meant. "And what's the secret of this recipe?" "Love, of course," Emily replied, nestling closer to him. But not that fairy tale kind of love. Real love that grows slowly, that learns from mistakes, that accepts imperfections, like cake dough that needs the right time to rise. Outside, the night was serene. Through the open window came the soft breeze that carried the scent of flowers from the garden. In the next room, Olivia slept peacefully, perhaps dreaming of the new songs she had learned. And there, in that perfect moment, Emily knew she had found her own recipe for happiness, not in cookbooks but in the courage to start over, in the strength to transform